Today I'm outside Pepper's Mexican Grill and Cantina in Crestview, Florida, discussing how you can make your chord progressions a little more spicy.
All right, so today we're going to take an existing melody with an existing chord progression and just spice it up a little, make it a bit more interesting. Now, I will say the point of this video is not to show you, 5 chords that will change your life or anything like that. The point is to show you the process I use to make my chord progressions maybe a little more interesting, right? And I will say there's absolutely nothing wrong with sort of more plain chord progressions. In fact, there are times when those are really preferable. Composers prior to about 1800 pretty much only used, plain, normal, vanilla chord progressions without interesting extensions and augmented chords and things like that. And honestly, they wrote better music than I would ever hope to write. But still, the point of this video is to show you the process that I personally use, when I'm coming up with melodies and want to make something that stands out a little bit more. So my hope is that you'll find this useful and that you can apply it in your own compositions. So first, a couple of caveats. So this applies more to traditional, tonal music, even up through like late romantic style, but so film music, that sort of thing. Not post-tonal concert works, some of which I do sometimes write, but some of the principles may apply there too. And again, I am no expert, so I will just, my aim is to show you the process that's been useful for me over the years, and I hope that it helps you too. Now, I am going to use Finale with Note Performer. You are absolutely free to use whatever notation program you use, Dorico, or Sibelius or MuseScore. Honestly, you don't even need anything fancy for this particular video. You don't even need like fancy playback, since all we're doing is really just kind of fiddling around with chords and melodies. So these are the steps we're going to follow. So first, I'm going to show you the original melody. Then we're going to fix the voice leading. We're going to add a little bit of spice to the chord progression, and I'll show you what I do in order to do that. We're going to improve the shape of the melody, and then we're going to make some final tweaks. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, well, without further ado, here's the original melody. And then it's implied that it will go back to the tonic afterwards, E minor. Now, what I've done here is I've just written out simple triads for E minor, C major, G major, and D major. Now, this melody works just fine, okay? But it's a little bit vanilla. It sounds kind of plain, right? So what can we do to make it a bit more interesting? First, let's discuss why the chord progression works in the first place. Now, again, this is not a video about functional harmony, but I'll just briefly go over why this works. Now, I'm using chord symbols instead of Roman numerals, but if you were to use Roman numerals to do an analysis of this, it would be 1, 6, 3, 7. Okay, now E minor is, of course, the tonic. This is in E minor, so the tonic is E minor. Now, we then go to C major. Now, C major is 6, it's the submediant. It has a subdominant function, and that's because it is the relative major of the subdominant, which is A minor. Then we go to G. That follows from C because it's the dominant of C. And G in E minor is a kind of a tonic substitute, right? It's the mediant It's the relative major of E minor, and so it has a tonic function. Then finally we go to D. D is the 7 in E minor, but it's also the dominant of G major, and so it follows nicely from there. D major, even though it's the flattened 7th, it has a dominant function in E minor, right? It's the flattened leading tone, and maybe in sort of classical harmony, it wouldn't be considered to have it would be considered to be a very weak dominant function. But these days we see a D major, especially in modern film music, right? You see D major, flat 7 go to 1 all the time, and so it's fine. Okay, so to summarize, we have the tonic going to a subdominant function, going to a tonic function, going to a dominant function, going to a tonic. So that is a very nice and conventional cadential chord sequence. And therefore it's satisfying because we're accustomed to hearing that. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our process here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fix the voice leading. Now you may say, hang on, these are just chord symbols, right? E minor, C, G, D, like they're not actual concrete chords, even though I've put triads under them here, right? A pianist would play a C major chord in a totally different way than a guitarist, for example, right? So what does it mean even to have good voice leading for chord symbols? Okay. The reason that I actually consider voice leading, even though these are just chord symbols and not real chords, is that when we're spicing up our chord progression, one way that we're going to do that is we're going to look at the voice leading between the voices of the accompaniment parts, because eventually these are going to turn into real parts played by real players, maybe not just simple whole notes, but still following good voice leading, even when we're just considering the initial chord progression, can make orchestrating this later a lot more successful. So first, let's go ahead and go back to our score, and let's do some simple voice leading fixes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from root position chord to a first inversion. Then that means we have E to E, so only one note has changed. Now this G chord is okay as it is, following from the C chord, but it definitely is not okay leading to the D chord. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this D down an octave like this. And now we have a good chord sequence with good voice leading, no parallels, nothing like that. Except for the last chord, and we'll get to that in a minute. So here's what it sounds like now. Now, if we were to put the implied last chord in here of E, you'd see that this D to E is problematic, okay, because that's just complete parallel motion. So we need to fix this D chord. And there's another problem with the D chord as well. It's that we have a G in the upper voice and an F sharp in the lower voice. Now, and this is not sort of an intentional spicy conflict. This is just sort of a clumsy one, right? So what we really want here is a D suspended chord and then a D chord on the second beat, or on the third beat. So we can solve both problems by simply making this a plain old D chord like this and having the suspension only in the melody. So let's listen to how this sounds. Okay, that's a lot better. But it's still pretty plain, right? It's still pretty vanilla. There's nothing particularly special or interesting about it. And again, I want to stress, in some situations, this is perfectly fine, right? In fact, this is exactly what you want. But this video is about how you can make it more interesting, so we're going to continue with spicing this up a little more. Okay, now that we've fixed the voice leading, it's time to spice things up a little bit. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make the voice leading a bit more interesting, the parts a little more interesting. So the first thing I notice here is I have E, E, D, D in the bottommost parts. Now that's fine, but what if I make this an E flat? And then we have E, E flat, D. So we just change the C chord to a C minor chord. And of course, because we changed this to an E flat in the accompaniment, we have to change it to an E flat in the top part as well, in the melody. So now we have E, E flat, D in both parts. So let's see how this sounds. Now, there's a couple problems with this, and we'll cover that when we come to the next step. But for now, this will do. So still looking at voice leading here, we have B, C, B, D. Now, that's a little awkward. I would probably want B, C, D, D. That works a little better than just sort of going up and down. And I do realize that I've now got 4 notes in this chord instead of 3, but that's okay. These are just chords right now. They're not an actual accompaniment. They help us to define the shape of what we're looking for. Now, another thing we can do to make things more interesting is try adding sevenths and ninths and 11ths and other chord extensions to see how they affect the chords and see if we like them or not. Again, I would follow good voice leading principles in determining where to add these. So let's see what we've got here. I think I'm wanting an A in this G major chord, so then adding the ninth. It's already got the 7th in the melody here, the F sharp, but adding the 7th and 9th is a little bit too much, I think. So we'll just add the 9th. And let's and this leads nicely to this A as well. So A, G, G, A, G is a nice progression. So let's see how this sounds. Okay, now one thing that's bothering me is this last chord. It's still just kind of plain. There's nothing really interesting about it. It's just a standard D, E. So again, we've got this E, E flat, D. I really want to make this a D sharp, but I'm not sure I want the cross relation here with the D sharp here and the D natural here. We'll try it. Let's see how this sounds. I don't know. I'm not feeling it. maybe we could just do a plain old B. You know, that is truly the dominant. Let's see how that works. Yeah. Well, the only trouble is that with this, we're running into the same problem we had before, where our F sharp here conflicts with the G in the melody. So I'm going to make this an augmented chord instead and see how that works. Yeah, I like that. So really this is a G augmented, right? It's not a D sharp augmented because an augmented chord is always a triad, so G, B, D sharp. So this is really a G augmented chord. And this is really a B major chord here, which is a proper dominant, leading back into E minor. So this is a G augmented chord, and this one is a B major chord. Oh yeah, and we should change this one too while we're at it. Now, if you're a pianist, this sort of experimentation is ideal to be done on a piano. Unfortunately, I am a terrible pianist, so I tend to do it either in my head or I can hear, 7th and 9th chords. I struggle with 11 and 13 chords, and polychords I just have no hope with. So for those sorts of things, I end up using the notation program. But regardless of whether you use a piano or your head or notation program or a DAW or whatever other method of tweaking the chords you want to do make sure you pay attention to the voice leading. Okay, the third thing that we should do is to make sure that our bass line is interesting. So right now, our implied bass line from the chords is something like this: E, C, G, and then G, B, E. So let's listen to this with the bass and see how it sounds. Yeah, the thing is, I think I want this to be a B the entire time, because otherwise it sounds a bit too final on this G. I don't want it to be in root position. I want it to be in an inversion, so that it tells the listener, hey, we're not done yet. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now, there are a couple of problems with the melody itself. Now, this is not a video on counterpoint or voice leading, even though we've talked a little bit about voice leading. Still, there are some things we can do to improve this. So first of all, we have E, E flat, D in the melody, and E, E flat, D in exactly the same spot in the bass. This is parallel motion, even though it's kind of implied a bit, it's still there. This is not great and makes our melody sound weaker. The other thing is this awkward augmented second here, right? This is an E flat and an F sharp. Now, actually, this is okay these days, right? In the 18th century, this would have been strictly prohibited. Even if you look at, say, Mozart's Rondo à la Turque, which uses a sort of a double harmonic scale, which is supposed to sound Turkish and sort of exotic. If you look at the actual lines, they avoid all of the augmented seconds pretty much everywhere. He even changes the leading tone to a flattened leading tone if he has to in order to avoid augmented seconds. Now, by the time we come around to like Ravel's Tzigan, the opening violin solo has a very prominent augmented second at the beginning and honestly all throughout the opening solo section. So even by the time Ravel was writing, it was okay. Still, we can do better. And the third problem with this melody is it doesn't really go anywhere. It goes E, F sharp, G, E flat, F sharp, G, D, F sharp, G, G, F sharp, E. It's just all very static. It sort of stays in the same range. It goes up to this G and it just kind of stays there. It doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. It just feels like it's kind of static. Okay. So ideally what we really want is for a melody to have a single highest point, a climax, and for the motion of the melody to not completely uniformly lead there, but to approximately lead there and then lead back down again. Okay, so let's see if we can fix this. So I'm going to make a few changes to the melody. Okay, now by making those few simple changes, we've fixed both the parallel motion problem, the augmented second, and also the fact that there's no highest point in the melody. So let's see what it sounds like now. So now the melody clearly feels like it's leading up to this augmented chord here, and it's a lot more dynamic and interesting. Okay, now let's make a few final tweaks based on our new improved melody. So one thing that's bothering me a little bit is that this melody in the second bar starts on an F sharp. Which is an augmented fourth above the C. So it feels almost like a wrong note. So how can we make this feel a little better? Well, I think I'm going to add a D in this chord so that we get this D, F sharp feeling here. So, in fact, do I want... Let's see. I could add a B, or I could add a D. I think I'm going to add a D because it's closer to this F sharp. And then the other thing is this augmented chord is fine. We actually don't need the B now. So... but we have an A in here. I wonder if we can add an A to that chord and see what it sounds like. So this D, I'm not convinced by. So I like the D, but I think it's in the wrong spot. I'm going to put it down here. And then what else could we add? You know what? We have a B, C, D, B. What if we added a C here? Okay, so let's see what this sounds like. Yeah, I like that 11th on the augmented chord. We could even add both, the 9th and 11th. Okay. I think that works. I'm still not totally sold on this D here, but we'll leave it in for now. So let's fix our chord symbols. This is now a C minor 9. Actually, it's a C minor add 9. And this is a G augmented 11th chord. Oh, and of course we never labeled our E minor chord at the end. Okay, well, I think that's about all the tweaks we're going to make. Let's listen to the original version and the spiced up version so you can really hear the difference. And now the spiced up version. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's a big improvement. It's more interesting, it's more dynamic, and I think it's a lot more memorable. Now, some of you might say, this melody is still really rather bland. It's just quarter notes and simple whole note chords. It's really more of a melodic skeleton than a real melody. And you'd be right. So in our next video, we're going to talk about how we can transform a simple melodic skeleton like this into a real melody. Well, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please like it on YouTube to help other people find it. And if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing to my channel. Until next time, have a good one.